the world stopped. For one long, silent second, the grand living room of the Adebayo mansion held its breath. The cheerful chatter of family, the clinking of glasses, the soft music playing in the background, it all vanished. The only sound left was the sharp, loud crack of a crystal wine glass as it hit the marble floor and exploded into 1,000 tiny, glittering diamonds. A splash of red wine spread across the white tiles. It looked like spilled blood. Every person in the room was frozen, their eyes locked on the two people standing at the center of the broken glass. There was John Adebayo, the 34-year-old billionaire owner of a great shipping company, and there was Emanuela, the quiet 24-year-old housemaid. John's arms were wrapped around her as if he was protecting her from the whole world. His lips were pressed to hers. It was not a soft, gentle kiss. It was a kiss that was desperate and hard, a kiss that seemed to say, "I will not let you go." Emanuela stood stiff in his arms, her dark eyes wide with pure shock. Her body trembled. A moment ago she had been holding that half-full wine glass. Now it was gone, and her world had been turned completely upside down. The silence did not last. A scream cut through the air. It was high and sharp, like the sound of tearing metal. "John!" It was Victoria, John's wife. Everyone called her Madam. Her face, usually so perfect and calm, was twisted with a rage so ugly it was frightening. Beside her, her best friend Olivia gasped, her painted nails flying to her mouth. The guests were John's parents and Victoria's parents. They stared with open mouths, unable to believe what they were seeing. "What is the meaning of this madness?" Victoria's father roared. He was a powerful man and his voice was used to being obeyed. But Victoria was like a storm. She lunged forward, her hands shaped like claws. "I will kill you," she shrieked. Her eyes were not on her husband. They were fixed on Emanuela. "You piece of trash from the street. I will kill you with my own hands." Olivia, recovering from her own shock, joined her friend. "She has no shame. Victoria, we must destroy her." They moved forward together, their faces full of hate. They were shouting threats, their fancy dresses and expensive jewelry forgotten. They were so lost in their anger that they did not notice a strange feeling spreading through their own bodies. John quickly pulled Emanuela behind him. He stood in front of her like a shield. "Stay back, Victoria," he said. His voice was quiet, but it was filled with a cold danger that no one there had ever heard from him before. Suddenly, Olivia stopped. Her angry face went pale. A look of confusion washed over her. She blinked and her hand moved to her chest. "Victoria," she whispered. Her voice was weak like a fading radio. I don't feel well." She stumbled. Her legs seemed to turn to water. She reached for Victoria, her eyes growing wide with a new and terrible fear. Then, with a soft sound, she collapsed onto the floor. Everyone thought she had fainted from the shock, but Victoria saw her friend's face. She saw the strange blue color around her lips. A horrifying memory hit her like a bolt of lightning. The wine, the poisoned wine. Their plan had been so simple. They had both taken a tiny sip to avoid suspicion before giving the glass to Emanuela. After the maid drank the rest and went away to die, they were going to rush to Victoria's private bathroom. There, an antidote was hidden, a tiny bottle that would save them. But John's kiss had ruined everything. In their blind rage, they had forgotten. The poison was inside them, and it was working. A wave of dizziness hit Victoria. The beautiful, expensive room started to spin. The angry shouts of her parents faded into a dull buzz. "The antidote," she gasped. A sharp, burning pain was spreading in her chest. She turned and tried to run. She had to get to her room. She had to get to the little bottle that held her life, but her legs would not obey her. They felt heavy, like they were made of stone. Her vision blurred. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was her husband, John, holding the poor maid he had just saved. Then she, too, fell to the floor. The room exploded into chaos. Someone was shouting to call an ambulance, but John only held Emanuela tighter. He whispered in her ear, "You're safe now. I promise. You're safe." How did it come to this? How did a simple act of kindness turn into a storm of hate, secrets, and a desperate kiss that had just saved a life? To understand, we must go back to the beginning. 8 months earlier, John Adebayo was not thinking about life or death. He was thinking about business. He was in the back of his air-conditioned car, gliding through the noisy, crowded streets of Lagos. A heavy rain had just ended. The air was thick and smelled of wet earth and car exhaust. The roads were shiny with puddles. John was tired. He had just come from a long meeting where men in expensive suits had argued for hours. He was a billionaire. He had a beautiful wife. He had a famous family name. He had everything a person could want. But most days, he felt a quiet emptiness inside, like a big, beautiful house with no one living in it. His driver turned into a busy market area. The car had to slow down for people crossing the street and vendors pushing their carts. John stared out the window, not really seeing anything. Then he saw her. She was sitting on a low wooden stool next to a stall selling roasted plantains. She was huddled under a small bit of plastic roofing that dripped water onto her shoulders. She was young, probably not much older than 24, and very thin. Her clothes were old, but they were neat. She wasn't holding out her hand to beg, but the look in her eyes was a silent plea. It was a look of deep hunger and a sadness so heavy it seemed to weigh her down. She looked like a lost child in a giant, uncaring city. Something inside John's chest twisted. He had seen poor people before, thousands of them, but there was something about this girl's quiet dignity that caught him. "Stop the car," he said to his driver. The driver was surprised, but did as he was told. John got out. His shiny leather shoes were not made for the muddy ground of the market. He walked over to the girl. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was gentle. The girl looked up. Her eyes were large and brown. First he saw fear in them, then the fear was gone, replaced by a deep weariness. "Have you eaten today?" John asked softly. She just shook her head, looking down at her hands in her lap. She was either too tired or too proud to ask for help. John's heart hurt for her. He walked to the woman roasting plantains over hot coals and bought a plate of food for the girl. She took it with a quiet murmur of thanks. She ate slowly at first, then faster, as if she was afraid the food would disappear. While she ate, he asked her name. "Emanuela," she said. In a soft voice, she told him her story. She was an orphan from a small village. She'd come to Lagos with all her savings because a man had promised her a good job. But when she arrived, the man was gone, and so was her money. For weeks, she had been living on the streets, finding small jobs here and there, but mostly going hungry. She was too ashamed to go home with nothing. John listened. He was used to people who wanted something from him, his money, his name, his power. But Emanuela wanted nothing. She just wanted a chance. He saw a strength in her that he did not see in the rich women who attended his wife's parties. He could not just get back in his car and leave her there. "I have a very large house," he said, making a decision that would change everything. "We always need help. I can offer you a job as a housemaid. You will have your own room to sleep in, good food to eat, and a fair salary. You will be safe." Emanuela's eyes filled with tears. This time they were tears of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, sir," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Oh, thank you. God will bless you. You have saved my life." For the first time in a very long time, John felt a real, warm happiness. He felt like he had done something that truly mattered. He thought he was just doing a good deed. He did not know that he was about to bring a gentle bird into a cage with a snake. When John arrived home, his wife was waiting for him in the grand entrance hall. Her name was Victoria, but everyone in the house, including John, often called her Madam. Victoria was the kind of beautiful that made people stop and stare. She came from a family that was even richer and more powerful than John's. Their marriage 4 years ago had been like a business deal to join their two great families. John had tried to love her, but it was like trying to warm your hands on a statue of ice. John explained how he had found Emanuela and offered her a job. Victoria looked at Emanuela, who stood nervously behind John. Her eyes traveled slowly from Emanuela's worn-out shoes up to her tired face. A tiny cold smile touched Victoria's lips. "How very kind of you, my dear husband," she said. Her voice was as smooth as silk, but her eyes were as hard as stones. She looked at Emanuela with disgust, as if she were a piece of dirt someone had brought into her perfect, clean house. "But look at her shoes. They are filthy. We cannot have that in this house." Emanuela looked down at her old scuffed sandals. Her cheeks burned with shame. "They are the only shoes I have, madam," she said in a small voice. "Well, you will take them off before you step 1 foot further on my Italian marble floors," Victoria commanded. "Go through the back entrance. The head housekeeper will show you where the staff quarters are, and she will find you a proper uniform. I will not have you walking around my house looking like a beggar." John opened his mouth to protest. It was a cruel and unnecessary thing to say, but Victoria gave him a sharp look, a silent warning that said, "Do not challenge me." He closed his mouth. He told himself it was just Victoria being particular about her house. He was wrong. It was the first drop of poison. From that very first moment, Victoria did not see Emanuela as a person who needed help. She saw her as a threat. In her jealous mind, a dark story began to grow. Her husband was growing more distant from her every day. Now he had brought home a younger, prettier girl from the streets. Victoria convinced herself that John planned to replace her with this maid. It was a crazy thought born from her own insecurity, but for Victoria, it felt like the absolute truth, and she decided that she would make Emanuela regret the day she ever set foot in the Adebayo mansion. The head housekeeper, a kind older woman named Mama Rose, felt sorry for Emanuela. She gave her a clean uniform, showed her to a small but neat room in the staff quarters, and brought her a hot meal. "Don't mind Madam," Mama Rose whispered to her. "Her bark is worse than her bite." But Emanuela would soon learn that Mama Rose was wrong. Madame's bite was far, far worse than her bark. That night, as Emanuela lay on her small bed, she felt a shiver of fear. She was grateful to John for saving her, but a dark cloud of dread had already settled over her new home. The cruelty began with small things, like 1,000 tiny paper cuts that bleed and sting. One morning, Emanuela had just finished mopping the entire dining room floor until it shone like a mirror. Just as she was putting her mop away, Victoria walked in, holding a cup of coffee. She tripped on nothing at all, and the dark coffee splashed all over the clean floor. "Oh dear, how clumsy of me," Victoria said with a fake sweet smile. "Emanuela, be a dear and clean that up, and do it properly this time." Another day, Victoria complained that the soup Emanuela had helped prepare was too salty. The next day, she said the same soup was not salty enough. Nothing was ever right. Victoria would inspect the rooms after Emanuela had cleaned them. She would run a finger along a high shelf and show a tiny speck of dust. "Is this what you call clean?" she would ask in a loud voice so the other staff members could hear. "In my father's house, a maid who worked like this would be fired immediately." Emanuela was a hard worker. She was quiet, polite, and did her job with great care. She was so thankful to have a roof over her head and food to eat that she tried to ignore the constant criticism. She thought that if she just worked harder and never made a mistake, Madame would eventually leave her alone. But her quiet patience only made Victoria angrier. She wanted Emanuela to cry, to complain, to fight back, when Emanuela did none of those things. Victoria's cruelty grew. John started to see what was happening. He saw the permanent sadness in Emanuela's eyes. He saw how she would flinch and make herself small whenever his wife walked into a room. He saw the smug, satisfied little smile on Victoria's face after she had said something particularly nasty. His blood boiled. He wanted to scream at his wife. He wanted to tell her to stop being a bully, but he felt like his hands were tied. Victoria's family was one of the most powerful in the country. Her father was a hugely important man. He had helped John's company get big, important contracts from the government. If John started a fight with Victoria, her father could ruin his business. He could make life very difficult for the entire Adebayo family. Victoria knew this, and she used it as a shield. John was also afraid for Emanuela. He worried that if he stood up for her, Victoria would find an excuse to fire her and throw her back out onto the streets. Or worse, she might use her family's power to make sure Emanuela could never find another job in Lagos. So he thought that by staying quiet, he was protecting her. One afternoon, he was walking through the living room and saw Victoria talking to Emanuela. Victoria was holding a beautiful, expensive vase. "My mother gave this to me," Victoria said. "It is very precious. I want you to dust it every single day. If even a scratch ever appears on it, I will make sure you pay for it." Her voice was low and threatening. Later that day, John was in his study when he heard a crash, followed by his wife's scream. He rushed out to find the vase shattered on the floor. Victoria was standing over the pieces, pointing a trembling finger at Emanuela. "She did it," Victoria cried. "The clumsy fool, she broke it." Emanuela was pale and shaking. "No, madam, I did not," she whispered. "I was in the kitchen. I heard the crash and came running." But Victoria would not listen. She yelled and insulted Emanuela for 10 minutes straight, calling her a useless and destructive liar. John knew Emanuela was telling the truth. He had a feeling his wife had broken the vase herself, just to have another reason to terrorize the poor girl. He stood there, clenching his fists in his pockets, his jaw tight with anger, but he said nothing. He watched his wife bully an innocent person, and the shame he felt was like a heavy weight on his soul. What? That night, he could not sleep. He knew that his silence was not protecting Emanuela. It was allowing the abuse to continue. He had to do something, but he had to be smart about it. The next night, John waited until he was sure Victoria was asleep. The big house was silent, except for the hum of the air conditioners and the distant sound of crickets outside. He crept out of his large, cold bedroom and made his way to the staff quarters at the back of the mansion. He found Emanuela's door and knocked softly. A moment later, the door opened a crack. Emanuela peeked out. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. When she saw it was John, she looked surprised and scared. "Sir," she whispered, "is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong," he said quietly. I just wanted to see if you were all right. I know today was very difficult." He was holding a small plate with a few sweet biscuits on it. "I thought you might be hungry." She opened the door wider and let him in. Her room was small and simple, with just a bed, a small wardrobe, and a single chair. It was a world away from the luxury of the rest of the house, but it was clean and neat. She did not take the biscuits. She just stood there, looking at the floor, and fresh tears began to roll down her cheeks. "I did not break it, sir," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I swear I did not." "I know you didn't," John said, his voice full of a kindness she had not heard from anyone in a long time. "I know." He set the plate down on her small table. He saw how her whole body was trembling from the stress of the day. He felt a powerful wave of guilt and shame. He was the master of this house, yet he was allowing this injustice to happen under his own roof. "I am so sorry, Emanuela," he said, his voice low. "I know how she can be. Please try to be strong. Don't let her break your spirit." "I am trying, sir," she whispered, finally looking up at him. In her eyes, he did not see anger or blame. He only saw a deep, heartbreaking sadness. "You've already done so much for me. I do not want to cause any trouble for you." He stayed for a few more minutes just talking to her in a quiet, comforting voice. He told her she was a good person and a hard worker, and that he appreciated everything she did. When he left, she was no longer crying. That night visit became a secret routine. Nearly every night after Victoria was asleep, John would sneak to Emanuela's room. Sometimes he brought her a snack or a hot cup of tea. Sometimes he just came to talk. He would sit in the single chair, and she would sit on the edge of her bed. He would ask her about her day, and he would truly listen. In these quiet, stolen moments, a bond began to form between them. He started to see the real Emanuela. He saw that behind her quiet and shy exterior, she was intelligent and kind. She had a gentle sense of humor that only came out when she felt safe with him. He saw her strength and the goodness in her heart, a goodness that his wife's cruelty could not stamp out. And she began to see the real John. She saw that he was not just a rich and powerful boss. He was a man who was deeply lonely, trapped in a golden cage. She saw the sadness in his own eyes and the guilt he carried for not being able to protect her more openly. She saw his kind heart. They became friends. Secret friends, hiding in the shadows of a house filled with tension. He found himself looking forward to their late-night talks more than any other part of his day. Being with her was like finding a small, warm candle in a vast, dark, and empty room. He did not realize it yet, but he was slowly, surely falling in love. As the weeks turned into months, the secret friendship between John and Emanuela grew deeper. Their nightly meetings became the one time of day they could both breathe freely. The rest of the time, they had to pretend they were just master and maid. In the hallways or the dining room, he would give her orders with a formal voice, and she would reply with a respectful, "Yes, sir." But their eyes would meet for a brief second, sharing a secret that no one else knew. During the day, Victoria's cruelty continued. But now it had less of an effect on Emanuela. When Madame would insult her, Emanuela would picture John's kind face and remember the encouraging words he had spoken to her the night before. It was like having a secret shield around her heart. John, on the other hand, found it harder and harder to tolerate his wife. Every cruel word she said to Emanuela was like a drop of acid on the last bit of respect he had for her. He started to see the ugly truth. Victoria was not just a difficult person. She was a bully who enjoyed hurting people who were weaker than her. She was a woman with a cold and empty heart. One night, the power went out. It was a common thing in Lagos, but Victoria always acted like it was a personal insult. She sat in the dark living room, lit by candles, and complained loudly. Later that night, John went to Emanuela's room. He found her sitting by her window, looking out at the moon. The room was dark, but he could see the soft outline of her face. "She was in a terrible mood tonight," John said, sitting down in his usual chair. "The heat makes her angry," Emanuela said softly. "It is okay." "No, it's not okay," John said, his voice full of frustration. "Nothing is ever okay with her. Our marriage, it's not real. It's a business contract. We live in the same house, but we are strangers. Worse than strangers." It was the first time he had spoken so openly about his marriage. He found himself telling her things he had never told anyone before. He told her about his dream to be an architect, a dream he had to give up to take over the family business when his father got sick. He told her how he felt like he was living someone else's life, a life full of money and power but empty of real joy. Emanuela listened without interrupting. She did not offer advice or judgment. She just listened with a deep, quiet sympathy that made him feel understood. "You are a good man, John," she said, using his first name for the first time. "It sounds strange and wonderful. You have a good heart. You rescued me. You talk to me. You make me feel like I am a person, not just a servant." He looked at her, sitting there in the moonlight. He saw her beauty, not just in her face, but in her spirit. He felt a powerful urge to go to her, to hold her, to protect her from all the ugliness in the world. He stood up and walked to the window. He stood beside her, so close he could feel the warmth from her body. "You are a much better person than anyone else in this house, Emanuela," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You are kind and strong. You deserve so much better than this." She turned her face to him, and her large, dark eyes seemed to shine in the dim light. In that quiet, stolen moment, the air between them was thick with feelings that were too big and too dangerous to say out loud. He knew then that what he felt for her was more than just friendship. It was a deep and powerful affection, and seeing the look in her eyes, he suspected she felt the same way. But they were trapped. He was a married man, and she was his maid. Their secret world was beautiful, but it was also fragile, and they both knew it could be shattered at any moment. The day it all shattered began like any other. Victoria was hosting a charity luncheon for some of her rich friends. The house was buzzing with activity. Emanuela was working tirelessly, serving drinks and food, her face a polite, neutral mask. In the afternoon, after the guests had left, Victoria went out for a shopping trip with her friend Olivia. The house fell quiet. Emanuela, after cleaning up the entire mess from the party, was exhausted. For the first time in her 8 months there, she allowed herself a small treat. She sat down on the plush, comfortable sofa in the main living room. The television was on, and a funny show she liked was playing. For just a few minutes, she wanted to feel like a normal person, relaxing after a hard day's work. She was so absorbed in the show that she did not hear the front door open. "What do you think you're doing?" The voice was cold and sharp. Emanuela jumped to her feet, her heart leaping into her throat. Victoria was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed, her face a mask of fury. She had come home early. I was just resting for a moment, madam," Emanuela stammered. "Resting?" Victoria's voice was dangerously low. "On my sofa? In my living room? Watching my television? Who do you think you are? Do you think because my husband brought you here that you own this place?" "No, madam, I am so sorry." Victoria strode across the room and slapped Emanuela hard across the face. The sound echoed in the big, empty room. Emanuela cried out, stumbling backward in shock and pain. She tripped over a small side table, and its sharp corner scraped her arm, drawing blood. But Victoria wasn't finished. Seeing the blood, her rage exploded. She grabbed her phone and made a call. "Get 2 of the guards to the main living room now." A minute later, 2 large security guards, young, thuggish men who were loyal only to Victoria and her money, came in. "This piece of trash thinks she is the queen of the house," Victoria spat, pointing at the terrified Emanuela. "She needs to be taught a lesson about her place. Take her back to her room and make sure she understands." The guards grinned. They grabbed Emanuela by her arms. She struggled, crying and pleading, but they were too strong. They dragged her out of the living room and down the hallway to the staff quarters. They pounced on her, pushing her onto the floor of her small room. They didn't hurt her badly, but they terrified her, laughing as she sobbed. They were showing her how powerless she was. Then they left, locking the door from the outside. Later that evening, John came home. The house was quiet, too quiet. He felt a sense of unease. He had a natural human desire for connection, for the warmth of another person. But the thought of going to his wife's room made him feel sick. She was a stranger to him, a cruel one at that. Restless and worried, he went to check on Emanuela. He found the door to her room locked. A cold fear gripped him. He called her name. He heard a soft sob from inside. He used the master key he had to open the door. The sight that greeted him broke his heart. Emanuela was curled up on her bed, crying as if her heart would break. Her cheek was red and swollen, a dark bruise already forming. Her arm had a long, bloody scratch on it, and her uniform was torn at the shoulder. "Emanuela, what happened?" he asked, his voice shaking with a rage he had never felt before. "Tell me who did this to you." Through her sobs, she told him everything. She told him about the television, the slap, the guards, and the terror. As he listened, something inside, John snapped. The fear he had of his in-laws, the worry about his business, it all burned away in the fire of his fury. He had been a coward. His silence had not protected her. It had given his wife permission to do this. This was his fault. He sat on the bed and gathered her into his arms. "I am so sorry," he whispered into her hair, his voice choked with emotion. "This is all my fault. I should have stopped her long ago. I will never let her or anyone hurt you ever again. I swear it on my life." She clung to him, her body shaking, her tears soaking the front of his expensive shirt. He held her tight, feeling her heart beat frantically against his chest. In that small, simple room, all the pretense of their lives fell away. There was only her pain and his guilt, her fear and his fierce, desperate need to protect her. John held her for a long time, just rocking her gently as her sobs slowly quieted down. The rage inside him was still there, a hot fire in his chest, but it was now mixed with a deep, aching tenderness for the woman in his arms. He could feel how small and fragile she was, and it made him want to build a fortress around her. He gently pulled back and tilted her face up to his. With his thumb, he carefully wiped the tears from her bruised cheek. He looked into her big brown eyes, which were still swimming with pain and fear. In their depths, he saw his own feelings reflected back at him, a profound loneliness and a powerful longing to be loved for who he was. The air in the room was thick with unspoken words and feelings that had been hidden for months. He could feel the warmth of her skin. He could smell the simple, clean scent of her hair, the world outside her small room, his wife, his family, his business. All of it disappeared. There was only this moment. There was only her. Driven by a powerful storm of anger at his wife, regret for his own cowardice, and a love that was now too strong to deny, he lowered his head and kissed her. At first, the kiss was just meant to be a comfort, a gentle pressing of his lips to hers. But then something changed. It deepened, becoming a kiss of passion and desperation. All the frustration from his cold, empty marriage, all the secret affection he had been storing in his heart for months, came pouring out. And Emanuela, who had known so much cruelty, kissed him back. In his arms, she did not feel like a servant. She did not feel like a victim. For the first time since she had come to this house, she felt safe. She felt seen. She felt wanted. He held her close, and in the quiet darkness of the small room, two lonely souls found peace. It was more than just a physical act. It was a moment of true connection, a silent promise that they were no longer alone in their sadness. For John, it was the most real and honest moment of intimacy he had ever experienced in his entire life. It was a world away from the cold, dutiful nights in his marriage bed. This was not about duty. This was about love. Later, as she slept peacefully beside him, he watched the soft rise and fall of her breathing. A powerful clarity washed over him. He was completely and utterly in love with her, and he could not go on living a lie. He knew what he had to do. He had to end his marriage. He had to get Emanuela out of this house and away from his wife. He would face his in-laws. He would face the damage to his business. He would face whatever consequences came his way, because a life without her was no longer a life he wanted to live. He felt a sense of resolve, of strength. He had been a coward for too long. Starting tomorrow, he would be a brave man. But he had no idea that his wife's wickedness was about to escalate from simple cruelty to something far more deadly. Victoria was not a fool. She saw the change in her husband almost immediately. He no longer avoided her. He looked at her with a cold, clear dislike. He was no longer trying to keep the peace. There was a new defiance in his eyes. She also saw a change in the maid. Emanuela no longer dropped her gaze or flinched when Victoria was near. She still did her work quietly and respectfully, but there was a new light in her eyes, a quiet confidence that drove Victoria mad with suspicion. She knew something had happened. Victoria's method of getting information was simple: fear. She called one of the younger maids, a timid girl named Blessing, into her private dressing room. She closed the door. "Tell me what is going on between my husband and that street rat," Victoria demanded, her voice low and dangerous. Blessing trembled. "Nothing, madam. I have not seen anything. Victoria smiled a cruel, slow smile. Are you sure? Because if I find out later that you lied to me, I will not just fire you. I will call my cousin who works at the immigration office. I will tell him your family from the village is here illegally. It would be a shame if they were all sent back, wouldn't it? The girl's face went white with terror. The threat worked. Through her tears, Blessing told Victoria what she had seen. She had seen the master leaving Emanuela's room very late one night a few days ago. The confirmation sent Victoria into a rage, but it was not a loud, screaming rage. It was a silent, ice-cold fury that was much more dangerous. She was not just angry, she was humiliated. The thought that her powerful, handsome husband would choose a poor, uneducated maid over her was an insult that she could not and would not forgive. She did not want to just fire Emanuela. That was too easy. She wanted her to suffer. She wanted her gone, permanently. She sent Blessing away with a sharp warning to keep her mouth shut. Then she picked up her phone and called her best friend, Olivia. Olivia was just like Victoria, rich, spoiled, and cruel. They had been friends since they were children at an expensive boarding school. They shared everything, including their darkest secrets. Olivia, darling, Victoria said into the phone, her voice smooth again. I have a problem, a pest in my house, and I need to get rid of it for good. On the other end of the line, Olivia listened. Then she laughed a low, wicked laugh. Don't you worry, Vicky, she said. I think I know just the thing. Victoria sat in her luxurious dressing room, surrounded by diamonds and designer clothes, and began to plot a murder. Her heart felt no guilt, no hesitation. There was only a cold, hard desire for revenge. She was going to erase Emanuela from the world, and she was going to enjoy every second of it. A few days later, John was walking down the upstairs hallway towards his own study. As he passed his wife's private sitting room, he heard her voice. She was on the phone, and her tone was low and secretive. Usually, he would have just kept walking. He had no interest in her gossip, but he heard her mention Emanuela's name and he stopped. He pressed his ear against the heavy wooden door, his heart starting to beat a little faster. No, of course not, Victoria was saying. It has to be perfect. No evidence, no trace. I want everyone to think the little tramp just had a weak heart and collapsed. John's blood ran cold. Weak heart, collapsed. What was she talking about? He strained to hear the voice on the other end of the phone, but he could only hear his wife's side of the conversation. Are you absolutely sure it works like that? Victoria asked. I don't want any mistakes, Olivia. This has to be foolproof. Olivia. Of course. If there was an evil plan, Olivia would be a part of it. A special poison from your father's chemical company? Victoria sounded impressed. And it's really undetectable in the blood after a few hours. It just looks like a heart attack? Olivia, you are a genius. This is perfect. She will just drop, and by the time anyone gets to her, it will be too late. The little problem will be gone forever, and John will have no choice but to come crawling back to me. John felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He felt like he was going to be sick. This wasn't just a threat. This was a detailed, cold-blooded plan to murder Emanuela. He had to stay and listen. He had to know everything. The family gathering next week is the perfect opportunity, Victoria went on, her voice filled with a sick excitement. My parents will be here. John's parents will be here. The house will be full of people and noise. No one pays close attention to a maid during a party. We'll put it in her drink. Oh, this is going to be so satisfying to watch. There was a pause. The antidote? Yes, of course. Make sure you bring it. We'll keep it in my bathroom safe. We'll take a tiny bit ourselves first, just in case, but we'll take the full dose right after she drinks it. No risks. John backed away from the door, his mind reeling. He stumbled back to his study and sank into a chair, his body trembling. They were going to poison her. Next week, during the family party. His first instinct was to run to the police, but he stopped himself. What could he say? I overheard my wife plotting a murder? They would ask for proof. He had none. It would be his word against the word of his wife and her best friend, two women from very powerful families. Victoria's father could ruin him with a single phone call. They would paint him as a crazy, cheating husband trying to frame his innocent wife so he could be with his mistress. They would destroy him, and they would make sure Emanuela was destroyed right along with him. No, he couldn't go to the police. He was on his own. He knew the date. He knew the method. He had 1 week to figure out how to save the woman he loved. A cold, heavy dread settled in his heart. He was living in a house with a killer, and he had to pretend that everything was normal. The next 7 days were the longest and most difficult of John's life. He felt like he was living in a nightmare. He had to sit at the dinner table with his wife, listening to her talk about flowers and menu choices for the upcoming family gathering. He had to smile and nod, all while the horrifying words he had overheard echoed in his mind. Poison. Heart attack. Get rid of it for good. He watched Victoria like a hawk. He saw the cold, triumphant glitter in her eyes whenever she looked at an unsuspecting Emanuela. It made his stomach churn. He was terrified for Emanuela. He wanted to grab her, run away with her, and never come back. But he knew that would be a mistake. If they disappeared, Victoria's father would hunt them down. A scandal would erupt and they would never be safe. He had to stop the plan here, in this house, in a way that would expose Victoria without getting Emanuela hurt. He tried to warn Emanuela without telling her the whole, terrifying truth. Emanuela, he said to her during their secret meeting one night, "At the party on Saturday, please be careful, very careful." She looked at him, confused. "Careful of what, sir?" "Don't accept any food or drink from anyone, especially not from Madame or Olivia," he said, his voice low and urgent. "If they offer you something, find an excuse not to take it. Spill it if you have to. Just don't let any of it touch your lips. Do you understand?" She saw the serious, fearful look in his eyes. She didn't understand why, but she trusted him completely. "Yes, sir, I understand. I will be careful." But John knew it might not be that simple. Victoria was clever and manipulative. She would find a way to trick Emanuela. He couldn't just rely on a warning. He needed a plan. He spent every waking moment thinking, his mind racing through different scenarios. What could he do? Accuse his wife in front of everyone? They would just deny it and he would look like a fool. Try to switch the glasses? It was too risky. He might make a mistake. By the morning of the party, he still had no clear plan. He only knew one thing. He could not let Emanuela out of his sight for a single second. He would watch. He would wait. And when the moment came, he would have to act, trusting his instincts to guide him. He felt a knot of fear tighten in his stomach. He was about to walk into a party in his own home that had been set up as the stage for a murder, and the life of the woman he loved was in his hands. The day of the party arrived, bright and hot. The Adebayo mansion was filled with the sounds of a family gathering. John's parents, a kind, gentle couple, arrived first. They greeted Emanuela with a warm smile. They had always been uncomfortable with Victoria's coldness. Then, Victoria's parents arrived. Her father was a big, intimidating man who looked at everyone as if they were beneath him. Her mother was a woman who was just as cold and proud as her daughter. They barely glanced at the staff. The house was full. The other maids were rushing back and forth from the kitchen, carrying trays of food and drinks. The air was filled with the smell of jollof rice and fried chicken. It all looked so normal, so happy. But for John, the cheerful atmosphere was a mask hiding something ugly and dangerous. Victoria was the perfect hostess. She moved through the rooms, laughing and chatting, making sure all her guests were happy. But John watched her every move. He saw the way her eyes kept darting towards Emanuela, who was quietly clearing empty plates. And then he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Victoria was being nice to Emanuela. "Oh, Emanuela, you look tired, dear," she said with a shockingly sweet smile as she passed her in the hallway. "Make sure you take a break later." "A little later," she complimented her. You are doing such a wonderful job today. Thank you." Emanuela was confused by this sudden kindness. She thought that maybe Madame was just trying to look good in front of her parents and in-laws. She brushed it off and continued with her work. But John knew the truth. It was the smile of a predator. It was the kindness of a spider, spinning a web for its prey. She was trying to make Emanuela lower her guard. The tension was becoming unbearable. John tried to make small talk with his father, but his eyes were constantly scanning the room, following the movements of 3 people: Victoria, Olivia, and Emanuela. Olivia had arrived an hour ago, looking glamorous and laughing with Victoria as if they didn't have a care in the world. John felt like he was watching a play where he knew a terrible secret that no one else did. He felt helpless, like a man watching a train approach a broken track, unable to stop it. He just kept telling himself, "Watch. Wait. Be ready." The sun began to set and the lights in the mansion were turned on, casting a golden glow over everything. The party was in full swing. John's heart was pounding in his chest. He knew the moment was getting closer. The air felt thick, heavy with unspoken danger. The moment came when the party was at its loudest. Laughter and music filled the living room. John was standing near the large windows, pretending to listen to his father-in-law talk about politics. But his real focus was across the room. He saw Victoria walk over to the drink table. Her movements were smooth and graceful. She picked up a bottle of expensive red wine, a vintage that her father loved. She poured 2 glasses. Her back was to most of the room, but John had a clear view. He saw her friend Olivia join her. They whispered to each other for a moment, smiling. Then Victoria did something strange. She took a tiny, delicate sip from her glass. Then Olivia did the same from hers. It was a small, almost unnoticeable action, but John knew what it was. It was them taking a tiny amount of the poison, so that when they took the full antidote later, it would look like they were just protecting themselves from something they both might have been exposed to. It was part of their evil, clever plan. Then Victoria poured the contents of her glass into Olivia's, so now one glass was nearly full and the other was empty. Olivia swirled the wine, a sly look on her face. Then she took one more small sip, leaving the glass about half full. John's breath caught in his throat. That was the glass, the poisoned glass. At that moment, Emanuela walked past their table, carrying a tray of dirty plates. Victoria stopped her. Her voice was as sweet as honey. "Emanuela, dear." Emanuela stopped and turned. "Yes, madam." Victoria handed the half-full glass of poisoned wine to Olivia. Then Olivia held it out to Emanuela. "We are finished with this," Olivia said with a bright smile. "Be a dear and take this to the kitchen and pour it away." It was a brilliant and cruel setup. They were not forcing her to drink it. They were giving her an order as her employers. They knew that a poor girl like Emanuela, who had probably never even seen such an expensive wine, would be tempted. Alone in the kitchen, who would know if she took just one small taste before pouring the rest down the drain? It was a simple human temptation, a temptation that would kill her. John saw the whole thing happen in what felt like slow motion. He saw Emanuela's tired face. He saw her reach out and take the glass. He saw the look of faint awe in her eyes as she held the heavy, expensive crystal. She nodded politely. "Yes, madam." She turned to walk towards the kitchen. This was it, the moment he had been dreading for a solid week. There was no time to shout, no time to explain, no time to accuse. If he did, they would deny everything and Emanuela might still drink the wine in the confusion. He had to act, now. He had to do something so big, so shocking, that it would stop everything in its tracks. He had to get that glass out of her hand. His body moved before his mind had a chance to think. He pushed past his stunned father-in-law. He ignored his mother's surprised call of his name. He ran. He crossed the crowded room in 3 long, desperate strides. He reached Emanuela just as she was about to leave the living room. He grabbed her by the shoulders. She let out a small gasp of surprise. He spun her around to face him. He looked into her wide, confused eyes, and then he kissed her. The sound of the glass shattering was like a gunshot in the silent room. For that one shocking moment, John's entire world was focused on Emanuela. Her lips were soft against his, and her body was stiff with surprise. He poured all of his fear, all of his desperation, and all of his love into that one public, impossible kiss. He had saved her. The glass was on the floor. The poison was spilled. Then the world came rushing back in. He pulled away from her slightly, but kept his arms wrapped around her, holding her steady as she trembled. He looked up and met the stunned faces of his family. His mother's hand was over her heart. His father's face was a mixture of confusion and concern. Victoria's parents looked like they had been turned to stone, their faces dark with anger. And then there was Victoria. Her face, which had been smiling just a moment before, was now a horrifying mask of pure, murderous rage. "What did you do?" she screamed, her voice cracking. The perfect hostess was gone, replaced by a monster. "John, have you lost your mind?" her father boomed, taking a step forward. But Victoria and Olivia were already moving. They lunged towards Emanuela like a pair of angry lionesses. "I will kill you!" Victoria shrieked, her eyes wild. She was not even looking at John anymore. Her entire being was focused on destroying Emanuela. "You filthy street rat! How dare you touch my husband?" "She has bewitched him," Olivia shouted, right beside her friend. "Victoria, we have to get her out of here. We have to make her pay." They were so lost in their fury, so consumed by their hatred, that they had completely forgotten the poison inside them. Their plan had been to calmly watch Emanuela leave the room, then excuse themselves and go upstairs to take the antidote. But John's kiss had thrown them into a blind rage, and their carefully laid plan was forgotten. John shielded Emanuela with his body. He stood tall and faced his wife. "Stay away from her, Victoria," he said, and the cold power in his voice made even her father pause. "This is over." "Over?" Victoria laughed, a high, unhinged sound. "It is just beginning. I will ruin her. I will ruin you both." But then a strange thing happened. Olivia, who had been shouting just as loudly as Victoria, suddenly stopped. Her angry face went slack, then pale. She blinked, a look of confusion in her eyes. She put a hand to her chest as if she suddenly felt a sharp pain. "Victoria?" she whispered, and her voice was no longer a shout but a weak, frightened gasp. I don't feel so good." She stumbled, her expensive high heels catching on the rug. She reached out a trembling hand towards her friend, her eyes wide with a dawning, absolute terror. Then her legs gave out from under her, and she collapsed onto the floor in a heap of silk and jewelry. The room, which had been filled with angry shouts, fell silent once more. Everyone stared at the unmoving form of Olivia on the ground. A new kind of chaos, one born of fear and confusion, was about to begin. For a moment, everyone assumed Olivia had simply fainted from the shock of the dramatic scene. John's mother rushed forward, calling her name, but Victoria knew better. She stared at her friend's pale face and saw the bluish tint appearing around her lips. A cold, horrifying dread washed over her, pushing aside her rage, the poison, the wine. They had forgotten. The plan was ruined, but worse, they were now trapped. The tiny amount they had sipped was now working its way through their bodies, a deadly fire spreading through their veins. A wave of dizziness hit Victoria so hard that she staggered. The grand living room began to spin. A sharp, burning pain started in her chest and spread outwards. It felt like her insides were being squeezed by an iron fist. "The antidote," she gasped, her voice a strangled whisper. She had to get to her room. She had to get to the safe in her bathroom. The small bottle inside was her only hope. She turned, trying to force her body to run, but her legs felt like they were made of heavy, wet cement. She could barely lift them. Her vision blurred, the shocked faces of her family becoming indistinct smudges of color. She took one clumsy step, then another. The last thing she saw clearly before the darkness swallowed her completely was the face of her husband, John. He was holding Emanuela, the girl she had tried to kill, the girl he had kissed to save. He was safe, they were safe, and she was dying. With a final desperate gasp, she too collapsed onto the floor. The room erupted into total chaos. Someone was on the phone, screaming for an ambulance. Victoria's mother was crying hysterically. John's father was trying to take charge, his voice shaking. John acted quickly. He led a terrified and trembling Emanuela away from the center of the room, shielding her from the panicked crowd. He took her to a quiet corner and held her, speaking to her in a low, calming voice. "It's over now. You are safe. I will handle everything." The next hour was a blur of flashing ambulance lights, paramedics, and frantic questions. Olivia was declared dead on arrival at the hospital. Victoria was alive, but she was in a deep coma, her body fighting a poison that had already caused terrible damage. In the confusion that followed, John told a simple version of the truth. He told both families that he was in love with Emanuela and that he was divorcing Victoria. He said that Victoria and Olivia must have had a sudden, tragic allergic reaction to the wine. Victoria's parents were consumed by grief and fear for their daughter. They were angry at John, but they could not cause a public scene. The reputation of their family was at stake, so the official story became a terrible accident. John took Emanuela away from that house that very night. He knew they could never go back. He took her to a small private guest house he owned, a safe place where no one could find them. As he held her in his arms that night, he knew that the nightmare was finally over. Now their new life could begin. Weeks passed. Victoria remained in a coma, a silent figure in a cold white hospital room. The world moved on. John, free from his loveless marriage, officially filed for divorce. With Victoria unable to contest it, the process was quick. He and Emanuela started a new, quiet life together. They moved into a beautiful house by the sea, far from the noise and judgment of Lagos society. For the first time, they were able to just be together. They walked on the beach, cooked meals together, and talked for hours. The fear and tension that had surrounded them for months slowly melted away, replaced by a deep and peaceful love. John's parents came to visit. After hearing the whole story, they embraced Emanuela as their own daughter. They saw the happiness she brought their son, a happiness they had not seen in years. One sunny afternoon, Emanuela came to John with a shy, radiant smile on her face. She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "We are going to have a baby," she said softly. John's heart filled with a joy so pure and powerful it brought tears to his eyes. He lifted her up and spun her around, laughing. They were married a week later in a small, simple ceremony in the garden of their new home. Meanwhile, in the hospital, Victoria finally woke up. She blinked, her eyes struggling to focus on the bright lights above her. A doctor with a kind but sad face was standing by her bed. She felt weak, and she noticed a strange numbness in her legs. What happened?" she asked, her voice a dry, scratchy whisper. The doctor gently explained everything. He told her about the poison that had been found in her system. He told her she was incredibly lucky to be alive, but the poison had done terrible permanent damage. "To save your life, we had to perform many surgeries," the doctor said. "There was severe damage to your liver and your lungs, and there were complications. The poison affected the nerves in your spine. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Adebayo, but you will not be able to walk again." Victoria stared at him, the words not making any sense. Paralyzed? Her? It was impossible. But the doctor wasn't finished. He told her that her friend Olivia had died, and then he delivered the final crushing blow. "Your ex-husband has remarried," he said, unaware of the pain his words would cause. "His new wife, I believe her name is Emanuela, is pregnant with their first child." That was the news that finally broke her. In 4 years of marriage to John, she had never been able to have a child. It was her deepest, most secret shame. Now, the girl from the street, the girl she had despised and tried to murder, was not only taking her husband, but was also giving him the one thing she never could. Lying in that sterile hospital bed, trapped in a body that would not move, with a future of loneliness stretching out before her, Victoria finally understood. She had lost everything. Not because of John and not because of Emanuela. She had lost it all because of the poison that had been in her own heart all along. She had planted seeds of jealousy, hate, and cruelty, and now she was left with nothing but a bitter, lonely harvest. John and Emanuela had also planted seeds. In a world of fear and darkness, they had planted seeds of kindness, courage, and love, and from those seeds, a new life, full of hope and happiness, was now beginning to grow. For in the great garden of life, you will always, always reap what you sow. The seeds of wickedness will only grow a bitter fruit for the one who plants them, but the seeds of kindness, even when planted in sorrow, can grow into a forest of joy.